Can I travel internationally after I filed my naturalization application? I'm Erick Widman, I'm an immigration lawyer, and yes, indeed, you can travel internationally as a permanent resident after you've applied to naturalize. The bigger question, though, is how long can you travel for and where can you go? There are certain places you should not go if you're an asylee, for example. But if you've applied to naturalize, you might be wondering, can I take a big 2-month, 3-month, or 7-month trip? The guidance from the USCIS policy manual is actually a little bit murky. You've got to fulfill the continuous residence requirement along with the physical presence requirement. So that means you have to have spent at least half your time physically present in the US during that statutory period when you're also subject to the continuous residence test. So the policy manual talks about meeting these tests at the time of your application. Does that mean you don't have to meet them afterwards? The best way to approach this issue is to assume it also applies after you have applied to naturalize. Those tests, the safest way to go is that they still apply to you up until the time of the oath ceremony. And this makes sense because if you were trying to do an 8-month trip outside the US and sever all your ties to the US, you would effectively be breaking your continuous residence and abandoning your green card potentially. So it doesn't make sense to not be subject to those tests up through the time of the oath ceremony. Therefore, you'll want to make sure you meet the requirements and don't exceed the minimum period of time spent in the US, and you protect your permanent residence status and you fulfill the continuous residence requirements. Also, on a very practical level, there are 3 main steps or events that you've got to be here in the US for, even if you're traveling internationally for a brief period of time. So you've got to make sure you're in the US for your biometrics appointment. You could reschedule it, but the best thing to do is not have to deal with that and come back in time and make sure you know exactly when that biometrics test is so that you can fulfill that requirement. You also, of course, have the interview to naturalize. And so you'll have to pass your civics test, reading and writing test, make sure you fulfill the eligibility requirements. And then after getting through the interview, you're going to have to meet the 3rd requirement, the 3rd big event on your path to naturalize, which is the oath ceremony. And there, which is roughly a month after the interview takes place, you are sworn in and become a US citizen. You take the oath of citizenship. So the other key thing to keep in mind is that if you're traveling internationally and you received asylum based upon persecution from a specific country where you used to live, you must not travel back to that country. That's because it could undercut your green card, the basis that you got your green card, and therefore make you ineligible to naturalize. So overall, keep these things in mind as you are planning to travel internationally after you apply for your naturalization application.